5 years ago, I was teaching at a Jewish learning conference for emerging Jewish leaders, and I led what I called a movement workshop. It was inspired by the Israeli choreographer Ohad Naharin, who developed this movement vocabulary called Gaga, not to be confused with Lady Gaga. In the workshop, we were melting into the floor, and we were like moving through water, and we were moving through peanut butter, and we were running into the walls and shaking ecstatically, and I hope you can get a sense of what was going on in the room. And so every year after I led this workshop, including when the conference switched to Zoom, the organizers would say, "Hey, Dave, could you lead us in a stretch? Could you do that dance thing again? Could you lead us in like that movement thing that happened to start the conference?" I always obliged, even if it took different forms. And the thing that I kept hearing behind the request was, "Can you remind us that we have bodies?" And the thing that I kept hearing from people afterward, after this crazy movement, was, "Thank you. I've never done something like that. I forgot I had a body." Jewish tradition can be extremely disembodied. We are about words, sitting for hours on end over sacred texts. Yes, we bow and we sit and we stand as we're able, but we can be pretty sedentary. As a tradition, we have chosen the mind over the body. When I say the word Torah, I think of words being passed from heaven to earth, spoken from God to Moses to the people Israel. But the truth is that so much of our Torah, especially in the book of Leviticus, which we're coming toward the end of now, is concerned with the scale of the body. Who is worthy to be a priest, a kohen, the stewards of the portal to the Holy One? Who can sprinkle the blood, please God with the sweet smells of grain and oil and animal flesh? In this week's Parsha Emor, we read, "No man of your offspring throughout the ages who has a defect shall be qualified to offer his God's food. No one at all who has a defect shall be qualified, no one who's blind or lame or has a limb that is too short or too long. No man who has a broken leg or a broken arm, or who is hunchback or dwarf, or has a growth in his eye, or who has a boil scar, or scurvy, or crushed testes, if he has a defect, he shall not be qualified to offer the food of his God." These verses, as you can imagine, disqualify a whole lot of Aaron's descendants. We learn from these verses that the holy body is undoubtedly male, strong, impenetrable, perfect. Physical imperfection, it seems, impairs holiness. And the three words I want to focus on in these verses is ish asher bo mum, that are on this person a blemish, a mum. A mum is defined as a deformity. It can be acquired at birth or during life. It can be permanent or temporary. But we have this term asher bo mum. And bo in Hebrew has a double meaning. It's both bo, on the person, and bo, in him. This double meaning suggests that mum, a blemish, on the outside must reflect a blemish inside. My friend Avi Gerlich, a Jewish educator, writes, "The role of a kohen makes demands on their literal shape as people. Blemishes are outlawed. Their leadership renders them as aesthetic objects, similar to actors on stage or screen. The perfect spectacle of the Kohanim and their unblemished bodies and their uniform garb have created a sharp contrast between the spectacular bloody world of a sacrifice and the mundane messiness of the world for your average Israelite. The beautiful men that move through this strange world must have been admired almost as another race of people." But let's be honest, what's really changed? While the priest's bodily perfection may no longer be a necessity in Judaism, the idea and the expectation of bodily perfection has become a wider cultural goal. Western culture in particular has for centuries equated beauty with goodness, even holiness. Research shows that the people who our society deems to be beautiful are trusted more. They get better medical care. They're treated with more respect. Efforts to urge children to look beyond physical appearance address race and disability, but success has not been shown with beauty. We are taught, many of us from a young age, to hate our bodies, to see them as a hazard or a curse, something to be conquered or treated with diets, exercise, creams, and supplements. Beauty and perfection are worshipped as nothing less than idols. But as inheritors of these sacred texts, we don't only look for the rule, we look for the gaps and the contradictions. Despite the emphasis that these verses put on perfection, we know that we're made b'tselem Elohim, in the divine image, and that includes all of our blemishes. We know that we came out of Egypt as ba'alei mumin, as people who had lots of blemishes. We had wounds to nurse from all of that building and slavery. There are even exceptions made for priests. Our rabbis say, if a priest has a deformity but is known in his city, then he can perform the priestly blessing and no one will be distracted. In the Mishnah, we learn a priest whose hands were colored with a blue dye cannot lift his hands in order to give the priestly blessing because the congregation will be distracted and they'll come out under their talitot and they'll look at him, and that's not forbidden, we can't do that. But if it's a town where everyone is in the occupation of dyeing fabric, then it's fine because, they're used to people having dyed hands. Disability for our rabbis was contextual, not fixed. We see in the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, a verse that responds with a tikkun, a repair, almost exactly responding to the verses in Leviticus. Kulach yafa rayati v'mum ein bach. Every part of you is beautiful, my darling. There's no blemish in you. Here, love puts on lenses that render any blemish invisible. We see the ideal of priestly perfection in these verses, but we also see the exceptions, and taken together, they tell us the true story. Our bodies are amazing. They are also leaky, creaky, mushy, achy. They get cut and bruised and deformed with accident, surgery, or age. We all have mumim in our lifetime. We have bodies, and this is the way of our flesh. Rabbi Dr. Julia Watts-Belzer, who's a scholar and an activist, defines ableism as privileging certain bodies or minds as normal while designating others as abnormal, and that gives the able the right to exercise power and influence over those considered disabled. This power is a form of violence, one that we see in our Torah, even as we are commanded not to put stumbling blocks before the blind, and several other commandments about disability justice. My dance professor in college, Tiffany Reinhard, taught us that being able-bodied is a temporary state. Even and especially as dancers, anything can shift. Going from able-bodied to disabled can happen with just one wrong step. This fragile reality is only one reason why we must stand with people who have disabilities for justice, access, inclusion, and celebration. Some of the closest people in my life live with chronic illnesses. Regularly, they tell me that their bodies revolt, and they're still expected in this revolt to pay bills, meet deadlines, go to work, and just have dinner with friends. They've told me they've had to work on seeing themselves with more kindness and to expand their view of what is normal or okay in life. That is hard work and sacred work. I also want to just say, when I say the word body in this week in America, we can't ignore an elephant in the room, which is the teetering status of Roe v. Wade. A few years ago, before rabbinical school, when I was a wilderness guide, I lived in Bend, Oregon, and I decided to volunteer just for a few hours a week at the Planned Parenthood there. And because it's such a rural area, people came from far and wide to get care. And I saw how sacred and important the option to choose what we do with our bodies was. And as the ability to choose is taken away from pregnant people around this country, I feel grief. I grieve that our bodies are criminalized, that autonomy is being stolen in the name of God, even as our sacred texts are filled with evidence that upholds choice. And from this grief is the renewed sense that we need to resist, that I need to resist, through donations and actions for reproductive justice. Sometimes, only sometimes, but sometimes, in despair and grief, I turn to prayer. The opening morning blessings of our Siddur includes a special one that's recited after using the bathroom. It's called Asher Yatzar, which means the one who formed. I'll read it, and this is how it's rendered in the Siddur. Blessed are you, Eternal One, our God, who formed the human body with wisdom and placed within it a miraculous combination of openings and organs. It is evident and known before you that if one of them should be opened or blocked at the wrong time, it would be impossible to exist and stand before you for even a moment. Blessed are you, Eternal One, the healer of all flesh and worker of wonders. Rabbi Ruth Adar reacted to this blessing, saying, I wasn't always able to stand before God, in the words that the prayer suggests. She was so frustrated that she wrote her own version, which resonated very deeply with me. She writes, thank God it all works. No, thank God enough works. For all our science and all our technology, these bodies you have made in your wisdom are wrapped in mystery. Rooms within rooms, openings and closings all work so wonderfully that we only notice when they don't. We are able to stand or sit before you, our Creator, because enough works today. Blessed are you, Eternal, our God, ruler of time and space, who heals our flesh and continues doing wonders. I think I might print this and put it outside my bathroom door. And I'm just so inspired by the way that she reclaims this blessing for herself and says, even if it's not everything, enough matters. I want to take us to one verse that happens at the end of our parsha. After all of the body, perfection, Kohanim stuff, we learn about the Jewish holidays, and we get the blueprint for Sukkot. We say, take these species of plants, including one right here on this bouquet, which are the willow, and it says, Basukot teshvu shivat yamim kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshvu basukot. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. Every person in Israel shall dwell in booths. Sitting in the sukkah is one of the few mitzvot in Judaism that requires our entire body. And everyone is commanded, regardless of their blemishes, to dwell in the sukkah, to celebrate our impermanence, to pray for rain, to be together, to eat, and to praise what is holy. This Shabbat, I want to invite us, even though it's hard, to shake off the shackles of perfection, which have done us no good, to notice the blemishes that we have been taught to hate. Instead, I want to invite us to see our bodies as kli kodesh, as holy vessels. Our bodies are portals to holiness, containers for holiness. And our bodies, amazing and frustrating as they may be, can inspire us to say, thank God it all works. No, thank God enough works. Shabbat shalom.